And I'm excited to chat with Kara today. We got the chance to connect a little bit last week on just sort of talking about what she's working on and what she does. HBO for me is a favorite, as I think it is of most of us. But Kara, you are the Director of Consumer Audience Strategy and Activation. For the sake of everyone here, can you just give us an idea of kind of what that means and what your day-to-day looks like?
Definitely. So like Sarah said, I'm Cassella, and in terms of audience strategy, leading everything from initial audience research all the way through to execution for our paid media buys, our own media buys. So whether it's for a new product launch, which we have coming up, or whether it's for a new show coming out, like White Lotus Season 2, really saying, okay, who is our overall audience? How do we think about how much money or efforts we spend on our subscribers versus our prospects? And then ultimately, what are the best signals to reach them, and where do we reach them? And so we partner very closely across a lot of different teams. So obviously our direct paid media teams, our CRM teams, as well as our data science teams, MarTech teams, to really bring that audience vision to life.
Interesting. And I imagine, I'm going to guess, that you're kind of approaching that differently for, say, a new launch or premiere versus these, I know they're going to love this because you loved Sex and the City, so you should love, Sex Life of College Girls. Is there a different approach or focus to, we know we have them, we know they'll hear about it through word of mouth or what they're already seeing, versus saying, look, we want to go after an audience that maybe doesn't understand why this is so good and it doesn't appeal to them?
Definitely. So for something like House the Dragon, which I'm sure or hope many of you here watched, when we have something like built-in IP where if someone watched Game of Thrones, they're likely going to show up for House the Dragon. That is an easy win for us, but we're always trying to expand beyond a little bit. And I think internally we probably think the appeal of some of our content is a little broader than sometimes it is. So even for something like House the Dragon, we really tried to go after, even broader fantasy or sci-fi fans to really expand that appeal, even if you didn't watch Game of Thrones. And then for something like, some of our content is a little bit more niche. So even something like we were talking about the White Lotus earlier, which I really love, it's a comedy, but there also are dramatic elements. It's, the style of it is a little offbeat. So how do you create that demand for something that is kind of hard to explain until you see it? So what we've really been focusing on is not narrowing our audience too much. So really going a little bit broader with a comedy audience or a drama audience for those initiatives, and then leaning into the platforms to let them optimize to really find who are our consumers who are converting, whether that is for viewership or for subscription, to watch this program.
Nice. And it is actually, it is super broad actually, right? When you kind of look at the breadth of what HBO Max has, and you kind of consider the different audiences that you have to appeal to for different reasons, I think it is always interesting to bring in somebody who has experience with something broader. And what I think is interesting about what you've done is, you've been there for 3 years, right? And before that, you were at Digitas. So you have this breadth of knowledge and experience working on other accounts. I always think it's super interesting when someone goes from, an agency to a brand, because it's personal, right? You're sort of saying, I'm representing this brand, and this brand in a way represents me. Talk to us a little bit about, what prompted that move, and also why HBO for you.
Yeah, so working agency side is wonderful in so many ways. You learn so much. You get exposure to a ton of different vendors, experience working on a variety of different clients. I had B2B clients, B2C. Ultimately, it gets very tiring and very exhausting meeting all the clients' demands. And so after about 5 years at Digitas, I knew I wanted to make the move to brand direct. And also, a big part of moving brand side as well is having more direct influence over these decisions. When you're agency side, you make a lot of recommendations, a lot of suggestions that ultimately are really wonderful and valuable, but it's up to the client whether or not they enact those. So really having more control over those decisions. And when I was looking at different brands, definitely wanted to move to a brand that I care about. We're all working so many hours a day. You want to have a brand that you touch, see, feel every day, and also that excites you. And I was lucky enough to get the opportunity at HBO. It was about 5 months before the launch of the HBO Max launch. So it was a very exciting time to join the company. There were streaming apps for HBO with HBO Now and Go, but this was a bigger, broader play to really compete with the bigger streaming platforms like the Netflix, like the Hulu. And it's been really exciting to see just the the platform itself grow, and also just the quality of content that comes to the platform, and just now the rate at which we're gaining subscribers compared to some of those competitors like a Netflix, like a Hulu.
Great. And one of the things that kind of stuck out to me as I was kind of prepping for our meeting today is I think what I didn't realize about HBO, partly just because, I don't know, you grow up with it and you sort of forget that it's something different and something innovative, is that HBO really broke the mold in terms of doing big things like hour-long comedy specials, which nobody was doing, right? They did live streaming of boxing matches, which back in the day nobody was doing. And then they really kind of laid the groundwork for what's now known as prestige TV. So, back when you would look at something and say, well, television actors aren't quality actors and television writing isn't quality writing, HBO really came in and changed that with The Sopranos and The Wire. So it's fantastic to kind of see a brand grow and evolve like that. But I think it's probably safe to say, I'd imagine that you still feel that energy in the office, right? That you're kind of working on the best with the best.
Most definitely. And that's really a big thing that keeps me there, is just the energy and the passion that everyone has for the content. And even if it's a program that you think, oh, that's probably not for me, just everyone treats every single program as if it's their precious little baby. And it is just so exciting to see that excitement and level of involvement. And, HBO just celebrated its 50th anniversary. And it really is crazy, the things that you mentioned, and now still churning out, wonderful content that hopefully, maybe I'm one of the few ones who still tunes in on Sunday nights to watch some of the new episodes, but that was always the big thing, right? It's it's not TV, it's HBO, and it has been really great to see that just raising the caliber on that content.
And especially for you, right, coming from, working on brands like Aetna and Whole Foods, which are incredible and huge and obviously have this mass appeal, but to go from that to something so talent focused, like this has to be fun. You have to love, seeing that side of it.
Yes, and it's much more tangible, right? Like it's, not even just seeing the billboards or, talking to your friends about it, but it really is sort of a cultural centerpiece. It's really fun, when something from House of the Dragon, which I, wasn't even, content that I loved, but I know a lot of people do, just becomes that cultural centerpiece that is, going crazy on Twitter, and just everyone really wants to focus on, and like you said, I came from other brands. Whole Foods was great, Enna's great. I also worked on a B2B shipping company, which was much less exciting. But
your friends weren't as excited to ask questions.
To ask about mailing and shipping solutions. But it also comes with its own challenges. And something I know that we talked about is, when you're working with such incredible talent in terms of the programming, you have to think about, okay, does this producer need to see their ad in a specific out-of-home spot near their home in LA? So there are certain things like talent optics and talent pleasing that does impact ultimately some of our media spend. So that's a consideration that I had never thought about, but it totally makes sense. And, if you're backing this big television show, we need to make sure that you're seeing your own ads.
And at the end of the day, right, they're artists. The directors are artists, the writers are artists, the people putting this together, they care and they kind of bleed it. So it's really interesting. And you're only getting more behind the scenes looks now, right? Because with the Discovery and HBO merger, there's got to be a ton you're learning. What are you seeing that's been interesting for you to kind of work through? And what are you learning, I think most importantly, from your leadership in this?
Yes, I've been part of mergers and acquisitions before, but it has been really interesting to see these two companies to come together with Warner Media and Discovery. Obviously, a big focus of that is the HBO Max app as well as Discovery Plus coming together under one umbrella, which has been really interesting just in terms of very different types of content, of course. But from a leadership perspective, what I've really valued is transparency where it can be had. These mergers are obviously happening at such high levels, and the conversations that are happening there, we're not privy to everything, but the transparency where it matters. And then also just, I think we all like to hear this day to day, is just acknowledging when things are hard and things are not good, and saying we just have to get through this period of time where things are a little uncomfortable, where there are a lot of unknowns, to get out better on the other side. And just that acknowledgement goes a long way. So that's something I try to do with my team, is just really acknowledging that, it's not sunshine and rainbows every day, but thinking about, why are we still here? Oh, because we believe in the product, we believe in the content, and ultimately we believe in the business.
Right. And it's funny looking back on it. In 3 years, you were there for the launch of HBO Max, right? And you're there for obviously this merger, and now you have the new app coming out this spring. And just for everyone's kind of background, when HBO Max last year was one of the top 10 most downloaded apps in the US. That's 45 million downloads from 2021. And when you say top 10, the other ones keeping company there are TikTok. It's Zoom, of course, now. It's Messenger, it's Instagram. And the big difference there is that we're talking about a company that started in 1972. So when you're 50 years old and you're still saying so relevant that you are one of the top 10 apps being streamed in 2021, that's incredible. And when I look at kind of what you're doing now, you're such a huge part of that. Your team is such a huge part of that. And so what are you most excited about to see this app do going into 23?
Yeah, a big piece of it is going to be bringing those different types of content together. So HBO Max is really known for that prestige level content, and Discovery is more known for that reality kind of content, that easy watching, and it's very different consumers. So there are a good chunk of people who do have both Discovery Plus as well as HBO Max, and will want to move to this new app that has the best of both worlds for some of them. But for a lot of people, it is, very siloed. So I'm really excited to think about from an audience perspective, and this is something that we're working through a lot right now, is who is that audience? Is it a net new audience? You kind of feel like you tapped out on the streamers of the world, but is there an audience that when you're even thinking about, a whole family watching that content that's for the mom and the dad, and making sure that there's something for everyone? And really the goal of the app is to bring the best of content, however you define that, into a single platform. So the hope is that we will just continue to grow by growing, not just the quality of the content, but also the breadth and depth of content.
Amazing. And I mean, when you think about how widespread it is, HBO Max is in, I think, 46 countries. It's huge. The appeal is massive, and being able to come up with programming and identify those audiences where, it doesn't matter how good the content is, right? If it doesn't reach them. So your team's doing incredible things. It's got to be a blast to work on.
Yes. And the international piece is something that sometimes we lose sight of in the U.S. In the U.S., we really build the backbone that then can be replicated in other countries. But yes, we do sometimes forget that, we're building this content not just for the U.S. It really does have appeal so far and wide beyond that.
Great. And I mean, HBO really as a whole is the first, I believe, and longest standing streaming service. So when you consider what they've been able to do and what they've done to evolve over the past 50 years, it's no doubt that they're the biggest and the best, right? And this merger should only strengthen things. But who else in the industry is catching your eye, and who's doing what you think are like interesting things going into the next year?
Yes. So the quality of content and type of content is something that I think we continue to keep an eye on in terms of streaming. So, Netflix is known for, constantly pushing out content, and that is really wonderful. There's always something new to watch. But how do you think about the quantity of content, and does that become overwhelming for consumers? So something that I think a lot about is, the companies that are maybe smaller players in the streaming game, like an Apple Plus, but really focusing on the quality of that content. And so for me, Apple Plus is definitely one that I'm keeping an eye on, just in terms of, I feel like they kind of fall to the background a little bit when you think about streaming services. You're more likely to think about HBO Max or Netflix or Hulu, but there's some really strong content on Apple Plus, and so I'm really excited to see what they continue to create.
Nice. And then I think we all have to ask, what are you watching right now? What are you most excited about? What are the big premieres that you can't wait for?
Yes, I was talking about this with a few people earlier, but White Lotus Season 2, I watch every Sunday night at 9 p.m. when it's first available on Max. It's a bit of I would say like darker, funkier comedy, but I love watching it. And then tomorrow, second season of Sex Lives of College Girls is coming out, and then not to be all focused on Max, but Dead to Me on Netflix, the final season,
oh my God, I just watched
is coming out. So I actually just rewatched all of the first and second season of Dead to Me in preparation, so I'm ready to go for that.
You're like, I took notes, I'm ready to go. I actually you
need a refresher when there's so long between seasons sometimes.
I just watched it for the first time, and I was like, this is so good. Christina Applegate just Still a babe, still crushing.
Yeah,
so
she's
talented.
incredible.
Okay, great. I think with that, we'll open up to questions if there's any in the room. Yes.
Go ahead. Start, Emily.
No worries. I'm just curious from, an audience strategy perspective and, given that HBO has a ton of bingeable content, what's your personal point of view on, releasing content one by one and really kind of building that tension and the tease versus, other streaming platforms that have chosen to kind of put out the whole season at once? How does that impact from your perspective, how your audience engages with the platform, but also, how you continue to build within the franchise?
Yes, definitely. And I definitely get frustrated as well at HBO Max when you just want that next episode. But really, it, number one, keep subscribers around week to week in terms of keeping them watching. And then also just, builds that tune-in sense that HBO was so known for, that Sunday night programming. So keeping a little bit of that legacy as well is definitely a piece of it. And then from an audience perspective overall, this is, I was talking a little bit earlier too in terms of some of our behavioral models that we've built out. So we do think about our audiences in terms of behavior. We have some people who watch week to week. We have some people who it doesn't really matter if when they start, they just like to binge all of it at once, no matter what type of content it is. It could be, some heavier content and they're still sitting there watching 5 episodes at once. So that's something we consider as well in terms of our audience strategy, and then just media flighting as well. So for example, we have a bingers audience segment. So for those people, we're not reaching them when the first premiere is coming out. We're waiting until 2 months later when all the episodes are there and making sure that they're aware that not only is this program out, but they can watch every single episode right now.
And if I could I have one more follow-up question. How much of the work that your team is doing goes into actually helping to advise new shows and concepts that are coming out, HBO originals, and then how much of the work is more so focused on, the aftermath of once the show does come out, how do we target the right people to watch?
Yeah, so it's a combination of both. So that was an audience exercise that we've done, is in terms of determining what are the holes in our content. So are there specific audience segments that we just don't have on our platform because we don't have the content necessarily that appeals to them? And an obvious one there is kids and family. We have the ability to create kids profiles. We have some kids content, but when parents are thinking about what am I going to turn on for my kid, it's not HBO Max. So that was a conversation that we had internally to say, do we need to go about acquiring more kids and family content, or is that just not a space we want to be in? We also have impact in terms of saying, okay, let's say we have a lot of YA content coming out in a certain time period. Should we strategically flight that at different times throughout the year to keep those subscribers throughout the year? Or should we do it all at once in Q2, for example, because we know those people are already on the platform and we can say, okay, you just watched this. This is the next right thing for you. So it really is on both sides of it.
Cool. A little bit of building off of the audience strategy, but how much of what you guys do from an audience strategy is based in driving viewership of content and shows, new seasons, whatever it might be, versus segmenting for acquisition and targeting people who are not currently subscribed?
Yeah, it's a balance overall, and it depends on the initiative. For our brand campaigns, we really focus on going out after and telling the HBO Max story to prospects, so people who are not subscribers or have never been subscribers. For our different originals, when we're talking about specific program campaigns, it really varies. For something like a returning season, we tend to focus more on our current subscribers, whether that's through CRM efforts or through paid media efforts, to make sure that they know the new season's coming. It's much harder to get someone into a second season, or especially when we think about, Westworld, which had a season 4. It's, just think about it from a consumer perspective. If you haven't watched it yet, are you really going to start now? So for those initiatives, we'll focus more on the current subscribers. And then it also depends too on, what do we think is the overall appeal of a show, and that determines how much budget we typically allocate toward it. And so if we have a broader budget, we're definitely going larger and creating that demand for those new prospects that hopefully then convert to subscribers, whether that is through, the single ad that they got for a new program coming out, or whether that is, they were primed with a couple of different originals ads, then ultimately for acquisition, they converted.
So question, this is a selfish question, is Odyssey, right? We build a lot of companion pods for HBO. How do you does that get determined super early in the process when you're thinking about the appeal? Because it's really not just a marketing tactic. It's like a content story continuation, just getting deeper with characters. So how does that go?
Yeah, that's one of the pieces that typically happens pretty early on, and is also has a lot of touch points with talent teams as well, because they obviously have a lot of passion in terms of where they're being associated with, versus something like a paid media ad, which you're always optimizing. Not that it can be last minute, but that story there is, you know, a little less relevant. So the podcast piece is definitely something that happens on the earlier end of planning.
Yeah. Okay, wait, I'm coming across here. Sorry to steal the stage.
So, hello. So connected TV and all these apps, it's just, to me as a consumer, is so hard to like. I'm literally, I got Discovery, I've got Amazon Prime, I've got Netflix, I've got Hulu. You know, if I want HBO and Showtime, you got to go elsewhere. So it's so confusing at some point, right? What is HBO doing with all the programming and with Discovery and Discovery Plus and HGTV and all that? Are you making it easier for the consumer to be able to digest all the assets that you have?
Yes, it ultimately will be easier come spring with the launch of the new app when it is all integrated. Right now, HBO Max and Discovery Plus are two standalone apps. However, if you go into HBO Max anytime recently, we are slowly starting to ingest some of the Discovery content. So I was on the other night and you'll see Chopped is in there, or Fixer Upper the Castle. So slowly starting to build that consumer awareness that, you know, whatever the new app is called, will have that combination of both Discovery and Max content. But yeah, totally hear you from a consumer perspective, and it's not even just within, you know, how many shows do I hear about, and what's the first thing you ask? Okay, what's that on? How do I watch that? And it really is difficult, and it's something we think about a lot, and it's in one of our program research questions for every new program, is that association of the program with HBO Max. Because that is something that is really difficult just in the world that we live in, of how do you actually watch all of this content that everyone's talking about.
Good question. I think we have one over here and then one more here, and then we're going to go to lunch. Ken, over to you.
All right. Ken from Mobile Fuse. Great job by both of you, Kara and Sarah. First, I want to thank Sarah for making the comment about 50-year-olds being nimble and being able to learn and fresh. So I'm going to tell my kids that when I get home later. So, well, hey, you know what? I wish. All right. So, but Kara, this is a selfish question, but it's not anything to do about media. What's going to happen with Jon Snow? Are we going to learn more about what happened? Because I'm still suffering. Big Game of Thrones fan. I'm still suffering from the ending, which I wasn't a fan of. But I heard that Jon Snow might be on TV again. Is that true? On HBO?
You know, unfortunately, your guess is as good as mine. The screeners for those programs are the tightest things under lock and key. So I wish I could tell you, but...
I would be really cool to go home and tell everyone about it, too, so I tried.
Okay, last question.
This is kind of going off of the gentleman's question before, and this might be before your time, but curious what constitutes like a full launch of a new app, like when you went from HBO Go to HBO Max, and now you're talking about this new app in the spring. What helps you decide whether to deprecate a current app and start a new one? Because you probably risk some users falling off, and what goes into that?
Yeah, a lot of consideration factors. I am still haunted by when we launched HBO Max, and there was a page on the website that was HBO Now, HBO Go, and HBO Max, and honestly, still no one knows the difference. So it really is thinking a lot about the consumer experience and how to make that as seamless as possible. I think a big challenge is, like you said, when we moved from Now and Go to Max, it required a new app for consumers to download, and are they actually going to do that? Are they going to authenticate? Or you have that time lag as well, is, okay, I'll do it when there's something new that I want to watch. And then you kind of lose that habit of, you know, it just being an app that you scroll through to see if there's anything else new that you want to watch. But unfortunately, when you have that rebrand and new product launch, it's sort of an inevitable piece. And so it definitely is a difficult decision. But, you know, with this scenario where we have HBO Max and Discovery Plus coming together into a new app, I think, you know, part of it is that excitement, but definitely losing those consumers is a very valid concern.
Awesome. So I have my younger son is at school in Boulder, and he and his buddies have been watching The Sopranos. So I've tucked back into it, and you forget like how spectacular that content is that HBO is making. Each episode is like a movie. It's just unbelievable. So great stuff, great talk. Everybody, it's lunchtime, but there's no buffet line. If y'all hang here, people are going to come take your orders. That means you can step, stretch, do what you want.